Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Lunch and Lore on Casters and Castles. I'm Tormented by Gnomes, and joining me is NinjaManMat, my lifelong friend and co-creator of the world of Anacra. Matt, how are you today?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Understandable. Have a nice day. Uh, I'm good. I got my coffee gnome here. I'm drinking directly from his skull. The skulls of my
Yeah,
enemies, so we're making progress.
that
Today's
tracks. Yeah.
it tracks, right? Today's episode is about the Emerald Tablets and the Firmament, which we've brought up in previous episodes. It's a super integral concept for the entire world of Anacra, how the Four Kingdoms are, the fact that the Four Kingdoms exist. It has a key role to play in the end of the Demonic Imperium and the ascension of Ramius to become the Overlord of the Dead. So we're going to tackle this in a couple of ways. And chat, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We will answer them as best we can throughout the show. But for starters, the firmament, obviously, well, okay, not necessarily obviously, the firmament is inspired by a medieval Renaissance era understanding of the way that the cosmos worked, where they literally believed that the entire universe, from top to bottom, was a series of spheres interlocked with each other. Actually, it goes back before that. It goes back to the book of Genesis in the Bible, where in that creation arc, though there was water everywhere, which is super common for original old school Mesopotamian, etc. creation stories. There was water everywhere, and God, the prime creator, doesn't like create the universe, but separates the water below from the water above. Basically, creates a pocket inside this endless abyss of water. Instead of visualizing the void as empty and void, people just imagine that it was water forever. So the original
That
firmament,
actually is not that crazy.
right? It's not. So the original firmament was literally a dome over the world that was the sky. When you looked up, you were seeing the vault of heaven, a literal dome over and beyond that was infinite water. That's the earliest version of the firmament. Eventually, the Greeks had their own take on it. Medieval Christendom, Renaissance philosophers had their beliefs on it with the whole nested spheres concept. So we didn't make this up. The firmament existed
And
elsewhere.
yeah, just to clarify, for those that were just coming in mid-sentence, we don't have Mesopotamian and Anacra. Joe is talking about real world ideologies and whatnot, not not our
Yeah.
take on what would Mesopotamia and Babylon be like if it was an Anacra. Like the firmament is a real thing in real life.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Oh,
or at
it's a
least the
real
concept is real.
it's a real legend.
Yeah. It's
Uh
a real thing, guys. There's space water. It's a thing. Look it up.
might be water on the moon, as far as recent discoveries may have shown. All right,
Yes.
so that's where the original
There's also
concept
rust on the moon. Did you know that?
rust on the moon.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's very similar to how, in Anakra, we have a moon that's literally just the bones of the demons and devils and all the horrible things, and it's filled with blood. And our moon is probably rusting as well. But in real life, they found that there are trace amounts of rust on the moon. They believe because, of course, like, well, there's no medicine stuff up there. How could that be a thing? And it's all of the crazy amounts of, not saying necessarily pollution, but basically this ambient crap that we have in our world is flowing out and
Oh,
is starting to attach itself onto
the moon is stealing our atmosphere.
oh dude, the moon's taking all of our freaking rust, man. This is crazy.
Oh, hold on. Side note. Note to self: do an episode on the moon.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. Not like where we go to the moon to do an episode, but an episode about the moon. The on the moon episode, live from the moon, is not in the budget yet. Like, comment, and subscribe.
Yeah.
Um,
Could you imagine? And now we go back to our field reporter. Matt, what are you doing on the moon? It's just me floating there in space. We didn't have enough to actually send him up with any gear. We literally just launched him with a bottle rocket and he got there, thank God. But yeah, he's dead. So
I've played enough
that
Kerbal
happened.
Space Program to know where this is going.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're going to send a rescue mission to get him, and then a rescue mission to rescue the rescue mission, and then we're just going to end up building a base there because we've crashed 4 spaceships and we have all the pieces we need. Back to
Wasn't our
Anakra.
mission to set up a basic base? No, man. Now the mission's to get that one Kerbal. That's the whole thing. Um, but just like you were about to say, mate, I think what we're kind of looking forward to today is that we're going to be kind of much like how we usually do with this show. We are kind of outlining how things were in Anakra originally, how things have sort of transformed, and then sometimes we just figure things out along the way. And I think that was kind of the flow for today, right?
Yeah, and when Matt says that, he doesn't just mean like in the current canonical timeline. In the current canonical timeline, there was a period where there was no firmament. Now there is a firmament, and now there are the Emerald Tablets. Matt's also referring to the evolution of the idea of the firmament in our world from its origins. And the firmament is a topic we've gone back and forth on, and it's one of those things that until we sit down and talk about it, we often understand very differently because we've had these past iterations of it. So, Matt, why don't you give like what we came up with over our D&D games before we sort of sat down to codify it?
Yeah, well, originally what we had was we set the firmament up as a way to effectively allow us to play in a game full of these crazy gods and monsters that we had been coming up, but we kind of put them all behind this paywall. It was like, hey, when we split up the Four Kingdoms, you had this. We kind of described it as like a net of sorts. That if you were above a certain power threshold, effectively Titan deity level and above, you weren't able to actually physically manifest onto the material plane. You couldn't come to the mortal realm, at least not in your full glory. You had. That's why we've now changed it a little bit over time, but for the most part, you had to either act through either the machinations of your followers or you had to take on an avatar or a lesser form that was killable in order to make sure that you could actually manifest on the prime material. And that was across the entire thing. If you were outside of the mortal realm, if you could kind of you had your own domain, but you could usually move through the other outer realms a little more easily. But like there was literally like, especially like in the games we had like a if it was level 25 and above, you were like level locked out of the material plane. We
Yeah,
had a thing about that.
it was
But
essentially
it
a
basically
finish
oh
your
go
thought.
ahead.
No, 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 you finish your thought.
Oh, I was gonna say it basically just made sure that canonically we wouldn't be running around and then we'd have Uzul just show up and go, "Hey guys, I'm gonna curb stomp your face. It's too bad that you ran into me." It was just to ensure that we had a very loose set of just basic guidelines, so we didn't get in over our head for anything that was too crazy. It would also explain away why, hey, why isn't this crazy superpower helping us with this? Oh, well, actually, they're not allowed to be here, and so a lot of things that DMs do to make sure that the game flows and they have an answer for hey, why do those angels help us? Because they can't. That's why. Uh, but that was really kind of what the firmament was. It was this bubble, it was this net, it was this thing that kept the good and bad things of the world out from meddling into the world how it was, kind of how it was initially intended by the Laughing God when things all first went down. However, like Joe was about to say, it has evolved immensely since then.
Yeah, where originally it was to make sure that gods and demon princes, didn't just run everything, because why not? If you're powerful enough to wade through an army, why don't you just an army or two? But now it's taken on a much more important mythological role. So to explain both the mechanics of the firmament, its origin, its nature, let's go back like we always do to the Dawn era, before the Four Kingdoms, before the firmament was created. The Dawn world had very little in the way of natural laws, like laws of physics, laws of magic, etc. It was not bound by the laws of physics. Beyond even gravity, right? You could float, you could fly, you could transform yourself into whatever you wanted. You could create things that could not physically exist in our world, impossible shapes, things that, bent back on themselves. The kind of crap you normally find in a Lovecraft novel where it's like, oh, this city uses non-Euclidean geometry that will drive you to the brink if you even gaze upon its accursed columns. Or that poster of crazy stairs that everyone had hanging in college, where it just does not make physical sense. The Dawn World did not have rules like that, so creativity was nearly unlimited. And that was half the point of the Dawn World. It was just, hey, that old world that blew up was full of all this conflict and restriction and nastiness. So let's have this new world where art and creativity and vision can flourish and everyone can express themselves however they so choose. And it was great. It was fine until somebody came along and said, hey, this is a really permissive area. I'm going to come in and I'm going to, oppress the crap out of everybody because nobody's stopping me because everyone's okay. Which leads to the Infernal, the Outer Dark Incursion, which leads to the fall of Luminius, which leads to the seven gates of the Silent City being thrown open and the dragons being unleashed to defeat the Infernals, so on and so forth.
In a
So,
weird way, this is a really wonky comparison, but it's almost kind of like for those of you who were aware of this very old Hanna-Barbera program, it's kind of like the Dawn Run was the Wacky Races. It was this really amazing, out there, colorful, intense randomness that had no real rules. Yeah, you weren't supposed to like kill anybody or anything like that, but it's like people stopped that. weird mustached man from hooking people's cars up to a radio and saying like, "Hey, you guys can't go anywhere," and then it would backfire and blow him up. And it wasn't like we had law, chaos, good and evil. It was just kind of, "Hey, don't be a dick," and then
Hmm.
people were dicks.
Because that's what people do. Uh,
Hey,
so at the end of the I'm not going to call it the Dawn War because fourth edition D&D sort of has their own Dawn War. So I'll come up with something at some
yeah,
point. But the new status quo was the city Luminius, which was like the biggest center of
the
sentient,
first conflict.
the first conflict. We'll call it the first conflict. That is an accurate term for it. So at the end of the first conflict, dragons wrecked the Infernals, but didn't kill them or destroy them. Uh, yeah, a lot of them died, but the rest were driven into hiding, stripped of much of their power. They got wrecked, right? So the dragons wrecked the Infernals, but and the sovereigns were all still alive and able to do their thing because they're one of the few things hard coded into the world. But a lot of suffering had been created, and the Infernals were still there. So the sovereigns had to come up with a new. And essentially, it was the equivalent of we started a Discord server where everyone can hang out and we don't have any rules, just be nice to each other. Get enough people not being nice to each other.
One general chat.
Yeah, exactly. And so the admins have to implement rules and moderators and all that stuff. And the solution that they came up with was to divide the Dawn world and sort of take this unshaped infinite potential and solidify it into a structure. That structure that they would create would allow for the cycle to continue, it would allow for life to continue and individual will and agency to continue. But it would also form a protective seal that would hide the energy emitting from the world to make it harder to spot in the hungry dark, and form a shell so that even if somebody did come across it, they wouldn't be able to get in metaphysically. That was the stated goals of the creation of the Four Kingdoms. And so, because they went from this formless infinite potential, they had to create essentially an engine that would work. They couldn't just put some blocks together and call it a day. They had to go from infinite cosmic energy to a stable system with interlocking pieces, rules, mechanics, etc., that function. So they had to assemble a working machine out of this infinite energy. And the way that they did that, they created rules, right? They created laws of physics, essentially, laws of physics and laws of magic. And those vary from place to place. You have a very different set of rules in the mortal world than you do in the underworld, Sky Kingdom, etc. But each of those has their own part to play in this system that allows, you've got the wellspring of the elements and the energy in the middle, and you've got the system by which it's drawn up and recycled back in. So you've got this flow of energy going through. And you've got these four different kingdoms that all have a part to play in the cycle, but also the way that they metaphysically, that those dimensions interact, the way that they interlock with each other, it's an emergent property of the four kingdoms create this barrier. So the firmament in Anacra now is a natural property of what happens when the four kingdoms exist, and it creates this seal around the entire universe of Anacra that makes it difficult to penetrate or see from outside. That's what the firmament is in its current iteration. It does not prevent Paragon level entities, powerful entities, from moving from one world to another inside of Anacra. Its whole purpose is to form a barrier outside of Anacra. So when people talk about the firmament or magic that breaches the firmament, they're talking about magic that reaches to other universes beyond Anacra is its own self-contained multiverse. It has its own elemental planes, its own afterlives, etc., etc. Essentially, if you pick up the Dungeon Master's Guide, it has a whole instructions on creating your own cosmology. Anacra is a self-contained cosmology that is implied to exist in a larger meta-cosmology with other worlds, but the existence of the firmament makes it extremely difficult to access those other worlds. Meaning that as a dungeon master, want somebody from Ravnica or Eberron or whatever to be in Anacra, that is not impossible. It is doable, but it is rare and special.
Which leads you to believe, how the heck were the gnomes able to do it?
Well, it was never perfect, right? It was never a perfect interlocking solution because The sovereigns are not omnipotent and they are not omniscient. They do not have perfect knowledge. They are limited, one, by their own nature. Arakura
Yeah.
struggles to envision things not Earth or Earth-like, so on and so forth. Which is another reason why the Emerald Tablets aren't perfect. So, and let's talk
Speaking
about.
of which, before you move too farther from this, I wanted to say, I think what you were about to get into, uh, today's episode, not just the firmament, but the Emerald Tablets is what we're going to be covering. And what we kind of did with with taking the firmament and making it this kind of level cap for the mortal realms, we ended up, as Joe had mentioned, changing the form and function of the firmament while keeping it somewhat similar. And then the Emerald Tablets kind of filled in that spot of not every creature, but especially those really bad, evil, terrible things, fiends, serve that purpose of not allowing them to move their way into and start harassing the creatures of the mortal plane. So that kind of filled part of that little role.
The idea of the firmament we had before now only applies to fiends, but it applies to fiends of all power levels. But it's also a lot easier to permeate because you don't need a special artifact to break the.
Yes.
Like in our old campaigns, you needed a special artifact to open the firmament so that big entities could enter the prime material world. In Anacra, mortal magic can summon fiends in defiance of the, well, not in defiance, but as a loophole in the Emerald Tablets. So,
Yeah.
what are the Emerald Tablets? The Emerald Tablets, that is a phrase that is used by mortals and like
Another real
non.
world thing.
Yeah, it's used by creatures that don't exist in 50 different dimensions to refer to the physical manifestation of the source code of the rules that the sovereigns agreed upon and put into action and laid as the foundation of the structure of the Four Kingdoms are the Emerald Tablets. If metaphorically and in legend, they actually wrote these rules like the Ten Commandments on giant slabs of emerald. That's not literally what happened, but that's how people have interpreted it in order for it to make sense, beyond it being,
Yeah.
again, the cosmic metaphysical source code of the universe. So the Emerald Tablets are what says, okay, the Sky Kingdom is here, and souls pass this direction, and energy flows in this direction, and shape is constrained to the. It's literally the rules, the laws of physics, the laws of magic, the fact that 1 + 1 = 2, all that stuff, and
Like if
it.
you were to be on a ship and you send a fireball explosion behind your sail while casting a gust of wind, and somehow that makes your ship goes factor. They thought of it and plugged that into the Emerald code.
Yeah.
If your DM says, "Yeah, this totally works," they thought of it and it's been coded in, and that's why it works.
Mm, thanks for that one. There's
Otherwise,
a story
on the
there.
opposite end of it, if you try and do that and it doesn't work, there's a reason for it because it doesn't work.
So the Emerald Tablet, when somebody like actually finds an Emerald Tablet, they have essentially coaxed the multiverse into manifesting its source code in physical form. It is a very rare thing. The Emerald Tablets exist as artifacts. It's not like there's a set number of them because they can disapparate and return to a non-corporeal form. If you find one that's stable, you have a lot of power on your hands, but not because you can now change the, because the Emerald Tablets are extremely resistant edited. You can do some small local edits. Like if you imagine you're opening the INI file for your game, you can adjust your game's resolution. You can adjust your game's, like you can turn off the tutorial. So you can in fact change some things about reality if you get your hands on an Emerald Tablet and you have the alchemical knowledge to use it, because it is not a simple thing. It's not like you just read this, scratch something in and write in a zero and suddenly God. It is a lot more complicated. A lot of the power of the Emerald Tablets doesn't come from changing them, but from understanding them. You can learn. It's like, oh my God, I just learned bunny hopping. So bunny hopping in first person shooters is the thing where if you hop in the right way, you actually move super fast and like glide across the map, or wave dashing in Super Smash. These are things that are part of the game, but if you don't know about them, you can't use them. And if you do know about them, they give you a big advantage. So most of the power of the Emerald Tablets, again, if you've got a physically manifested one, comes from being able to learn these secrets, these exploits that are not, you're not hacking, you're just understanding things no one else does understand, and you can gain great knowledge and great power. The Emerald Tablets are of particular interest to alchemists. alchemists in this world, they're not just, magical chemists. They study the laws of the universe, they study the firmament, the emerald tablets, how everything interlocks, and they use that knowledge to change things into other things to seek enlightenment. It's sort of the magic of the Four Kingdoms and their interactions in a way.
Which, just to clarify, Ramius was not running around Anacra wave dashing when he found his first tablet and was
Or
experimenting with it.
correct. Ramius
He
did,
did it.
yeah, he did the big
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. Uh, and I don't think we've ever discussed what the conditions are for locating or finding one of these. I feel like much like things that a mortal creature normally can't see into the ethereal, I feel like the emerald tablets are just like another entity that is basically on another either pocket or non-existent plane that's just kind of lingering. It may move, it may stay stagnant, and people who normally uncover them almost stumble into them. It's like a one in a not even one in a million. Like it's a crazy percentile where under the right conditions they just kind of happen to stumble into it. And like you said, they may not even get to hold on to it for long.
The more alchemical knowledge they have, the more likely they are to find one, be able to use it, hold on to it, etc. But it is extremely rare, like you said. And the Emerald Tablets can't really be said to exist anywhere because they are the rules. They're just, it's like, it's almost the equivalent of getting your hands on the monster manual or the player's handbook and realizing that there's a feat combination that is incredibly overpowered. It's
Yes.
almost like a character in the game, right? Not you, the player, but a character in the game
Becoming
found the
self-aware that they're in
player's
the game.
handbook.
Yeah, like, like when you roll a 20 on your passive perception, the DM says you look around and you see you're surrounded by giants and you're on top of a table and, they're describing you looking down at the game and then you
There's
return to
strange
yourself and
shaped
go, "Whoa."
boulders all around, and those are the
Yeah,
dice.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Exactly. I feel like in a way it's kind of like that. You almost realize what's going on here and then immediately snap back in and try not to go mad
Hmm.
from what happens there. And I feel like in a lot of ways, there could be creatures, entities, people that maybe stumble onto again, not that every emerald tablet looks like an actual green slab of like the Ten
Hmm.
Commandments. They take on different forms and whatnot, and you could have someone that uncovers an emerald tablet, has no idea what it is, and just looks like a rock in the road. It just kicks it on down the lane, and no one has any idea. They just kick down the rules to gravity.
And it follows its own rules. And only somebody with the right alchemical knowledge could be like, oh my God. And then they use their various rites, etc., to coax this into the form of an actual emerald tablet or something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Emerald Tablets do have caretakers who I don't know if we ever discussed if they arose spontaneously as part of like, did the sovereigns deliberately create them? Were they written into the source code of the universe? Where did they come from? They're very mysterious, and we haven't really fleshed them out much ourselves, but they're called the scribes. And
And I think
if
that's almost purposefully. We kind of have left that very ambiguous.
even as the creators, there's some things where the answer isn't as important as the mystery to us.
Yes,
And we
exactly.
we may delve into that at some point. The other thing is, Matt, if I recall correctly, I think I came up with the name, but the idea of the scribes was your idea.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a lot of different weird names, and you settled on Scribe, and I think that was the best. But yeah, they're these really almost because when we originally talked about the Emerald Tablets and how we were incorporating them into the laws of the worlds, we kind of described it as when like in Call of Cthulhu, when cultists interact with Cthulhu, and they're supposed to be these eldritch gods are supposed to be these like fifth dimensional beings or whatever. And when they're interacting with you, it's almost like when we describe people interacting with ants. It's not even like you're evil for crushing an anthill. Like it's just it's a nuisance. It's getting into my house. It
I
sucks.
didn't even
Uh,
see it,
yeah,
and I
I didn't
stepped
even
on it.
see it.
Yeah.
Like whatever have you. But it's kind of that same thing. Like the when an eldritch god dips their finger into the world, and you see like, oh my god, this horrible abomination, and all they're doing is coming in and just checking things out and seeing what's going on. We kind of describe that as being a very similar thing for the Emerald Tablets, and I feel like the scribes are along that same line. They themselves, I wouldn't say are aberrations or anything
But
necessarily,
they're
but
alien.
they kind of have this very exactly. They don't. They both fit perfectly in an Anacra and are completely out of place compared to everything else that's there. They're just the servitors and the watchers, and they make sure that things keep running.
I would define them as the closest thing that an Akra has to the Modrons or the Inevitables, Prime.
Yes.
Like they're entities of pure law. But much like good and evil in the world of Anakra, like the Celestials, yeah, they care about compassion and light and kindness, most of them, not all of them. But their idea of good and evil is more we must protect the universe so it still exists rather than governing how everyone, all mortals, live their lives. Uh, and how evil is less about like we're battling for the hearts and minds of every soul in Anakra. That's just a means to an end for evil in Anakra. Their end is to just have control over everything and make everything want it. Same with law and chaos. This isn't a world where the true cosmic entities of law care about mortal society and whether mortals have good laws. And like they're not out to Borg the mortal races and they're not out to punish criminals. That's not what cosmic law is about. Cosmic law
Yeah.
in Anakra is the laws of nature, the laws of magic, the laws of the universe. Is the divine engine still running? And if you
Yeah.
aren't messing with that, if you're living a completely chaotic life, but it's still within the confines of that, you're not even on their radar.
Oh, yeah. And that's kind of the point of what Anakra was in its form, was not relegating and going in and saying, "Hey, you have to do this, that, or the other." As long as you're not destroying everyone's playground, it's okay.
So the
But
scribe,
you're right. I never really thought about what you were like you mentioned with the scribes being similar to the Modrons. That actually makes a lot of sense. I think it's almost like a really, like you said, comparing them to the Modrons or to the Inevitables. It's a weird reskin, but it makes a lot of sense now that you phrased it that way.
and I often see them as mechanical in my mind, right? These
Yeah.
mechanical titans vast beyond your comprehension. When you see a scribe manifest, you might see like a mechanical figure that's only as tall as a humanoid, but that's just one facet of this multidimensional thing that exists partially. It's like, what are you? I am the place where the mortal world and the underworld like meet. I am the governor of that place, and I am that interaction. So I'm not really a corporeal entity. I'm the manifestation of this abstract concept. But when you see me, it's like a clockwork person.
See, I see where you're going with that. I almost, when I was thinking of the scribes, I kind of saw them as this very, we mentioned like alien, and what does that necessarily mean other than just not really normal or usual, different than what we expect? And definitely mechanical, I think fits into it. I almost see them, at least for me, closer to like this very sci-fi merging of like weird streamlined organic and, like you said, just machine. Not that they're like, oh, here's chunks of cybernetic arms
They're
and
not
stuff
the
like that.
Borg.
They're not the Borg. No, no, no. But almost like in a way, kind of like Terminator, like the liquid metal Terminator, where they have this very mutable form that seems very mechanical in the way that like their movements and whatnot are. They have these almost, how like in scary movies, ghosts kind of like they take away frames so they kind of shift around really quick and it looks freaky. I kind of see these very mechanical prescribed movements, but almost this shifting to where they're not quite there, but they are. Like I see them almost like like almost a weird sci-fi thing in a way.
Yeah,
At least
definitely they have
that's
a
in my brain of
sci-fi, like
brain.
they don't have laser guns, but they definitely have more of a sci-fi aesthetic to them. Uh
Yeah, like I don't see big gears and like steam plumes like pop.
mhm.
Nothing like that. I see this very streamlined, alien looking robot. Effectively, is what we're kind of describing.
I'm almost imagining like a liquid metal ether gaunt. You remember from the Fiend Folio back in the day?
I don't, but I
I'll see if
can.
I can pull them up. It's gonna take me or a spell weaver.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's horrifying, mate.
Okay, yeah, the ether gaunt, but without the like the thing jutting, the bone jutting out of the back.
No,
Uh,
but you're right. This is really pretty close, actually, to what I was thinking. I mean, again, this is way more horror than I was expecting, but yeah, it's right in there. Dang, that thing is nasty.
or like the spell weavers. Um, yeah, let me try to pull up some Fiend Folio art for chat. It's gonna take me a moment.
Yes. Okay. The Spellweaver, absolutely way more what I was thinking. Because
Yeah,
again, when I think of the scribes, they have this again, this very in-look appearance, multiple arms. So I would say kind of a mix. But yeah, imagining if you're mixing an Inevitable and a Spellweaver, that's absolutely how I see the, or even gosh. what is this thing here? Oh, this one has like a freaking owl face. That's
The Spellweaver,
sick.
yeah.
Hmm.
All right.
Oh, I was looking at a second edition Spellweaver. That one didn't have the owl face. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyway, yes, that is way more in line with how my vision for a scribe was.
So the scribes have this very esoteric existence. They rarely interact with humanity. Fun fact: the scribes are one of your options if you play a cleric in Anacra and you want to be a cleric with the knowledge dome. And knowledge clerics of the scribes rarely worship them. It's not like they say, "Oh, great scribes who prevent the universe from exploding, hallowed be thy name." More like they study the mysteries of the scribes and in an effort to gain more knowledge. You do not have to be pious. You do not have to be a zealot to be a cleric. If you are studious and you study the mysteries of this thing and the right prayers and rites, you could be a very pragmatic, practical cleric who's not that like faithful, but knows the ins and outs of the religion in order to get the information you want. That tends to
Absolutely.
work best with two types of deities. And I say this because I'm playing a character like this in Matt's home campaign, Anakra,
Yep.
where so there's a couple different types of deities, right? Let's say Zalar. Let's say you want to get power from Zalar. Zalar, the Sun Rider, is a very zealous deity, inspires religious fervor, and has a way of life that you want to live by. Fun fact, chat. Uh, okay, chat has a couple of things here. I'm gonna break. If the scribes are
I
semi-mechanical, does that make
yeah.
Anachronist the anti-scribe?
I didn't want to cut you off when you were explaining, but I did want to take that question rather soon because that's pretty important.
No comments. It's emoji. Um, Second off, you mentioned
Right,
Johnny
really,
the.
that's it? That's all we're gonna say? Oh gosh, okay.
No, Matt, if you want to say something,
Fine.
you can say something.
No,
This
no,
is
I don't wanna
this
ruin it.
this is a
Because
reward for like not everybody who watches Quest for the Book of Dawn watches Luncheon Lord. Let's hand out
okay,
some
so
Easter eggs here.
what I think what I will say, and this was based off of, again, like I said, since we have collected all of our works and our games and put it into Anakra, much has changed. But one of the things that has stayed the same is that the aforementioned Machine Prince, who is I guess we could say a semi-infernal. Have you covered that? Is that a thing you've covered?
In the Infernal episode, I think we alluded to the idea that most Infernals are invaders from the Hungry Dark, but there are exceptions.
So again, and you can cut me off at any time if it's too much. But one of the things that we'll get into one of these days at some point. There's some secret lore that's in the background of a lot of things. But let's just say that there is an entity that had effectively tainted or changed one of the scribes, and then maybe something happened there. But yeah, basically, Anachronist has these very world endy, I know what's going to end up happening one day kind of a thing going on. And there's a reason for that. Oh, are you muted, mate?
I am muted. Gain
Plus
one
one
plus
XP.
one
Yeah.
XP. I had to do that in Red Sky City the other day. I gave everyone plus
Really?
one improvement point because I left myself on mute. The
Heck
other thing I
yeah.
was going to say is that Johnny the Wise, the way I created that character for Reinforce, was a cleric of the scribes. So, but he was not a devout cleric. He was a pragmatic cleric. Going back to my original point, first off, let me pull up the Spellweaver. This is what a Spellweaver looks like. This art is from, I believe, the Fiend Folio from 3rd edition. They have 6 arms. They have this like otherworldly look to them. And so the scribes they don't have owl faces. I think imagine them having like smooth faces, with this vague liquid, synthetic, organic liquid metal look to them. But also the scribes can appear in a lot of different ways. They're very, very esoteric. They're one of the things that looks with a Nakra, I try to keep as much as possible to a classic fantasy aesthetic without a lot of science fantasy or steampunk stuff, though there is some of that, especially in like later day Sharon, etc. Uh,
Yeah.
but the scribes and a lot of the other weird stuff, esoteric stuff, does tend towards this more science fantasy look. So yeah, there's that. So going back to my point about clerics,
Wait, did you share the scribe?
I did. Well, I think
Oh,
I did. Yeah, the
damn it.
Spellweaver. Yeah, I pulled up the Spellweaver on stream. If you look on stream, you'll see it pop up in a moment.
Ah, I missed it. Oh, yep, there it
Yep,
is.
it's
Yep,
back,
yep,
and
yep,
it'll be
yep.
gone again in a moment. All right, so back to my point about clerics. Zalar tends to be a very religious titan, and is one of the more worshippers of Zalar tend to be much more religious. Worshippers of Vindor, yeah, they have like this religiousness to them, but a lot of followers of, say, Odin are more about like we should take an example from Odin and hope that Odin backs us up. And yeah, we've got some secret warrior rituals, but mostly it's not like, I'm a pious person. It's more like I'm a warrior who prays to Odin before I go into battle. Uses Odin as this cultural icon of what we should look like, what we should act like. A lot of the Titans and the Sovereigns don't directly pursue religion and followers for reasons we've discussed in the past. Religions pop up around them, but it's not like the Sovereigns or the Titans themselves encourage that. Zalar encourages worship. And the reason Zalar encourages worship because Zalar has an agenda that Zalar believes is right and true and just and needs to be pursued, namely ruthlessly scourging out fiends, infernals, the undead, etc. Very, very, very pious and zealous about that. So if you want to pray to Zalar for power, most of the time, you need to be somebody who buys into the Zalorian faith in some regard, or at least abides by the standards which Zalar will hold you. So if you're a pragmatic cleric who's just like, oh, well, if I need some fire magic, I know some rites to implore spirits loyal to sin. And if I need some water magic, I know how to invoke a water spirit on behalf of Liban who will help me out. Sort of, it's not that I'm worshiping people. It's that I know the rituals and I know the words to say to get the gods to give me a little bit of their power. Zalar,
You're kind of like doing a free trial on like everybody. You're like, oh
mm-hmm.
yeah, let me just keep making new accounts and just like,
New email
cleric
address every day.
cleric underscore one, cleric underscore two, every 30 days. You're like, all right, let's
Mm-hmm.
make this happen.
The exception. So Zalar is not likely to go along with that unless you're asking for spells and magic that are going to advance Zalar's goals. So even if you're not a cleric of Zalar, the Sunrider will grant your wish for a sunbeam spell if you are fragging the undead or an infernal or something like that. Because even though you're not a faithful servant, you're doing will.
Or if you're turning undead, if you just grab a holy symbol and start just shouting to Zalar, then yeah, he's gonna say, okay, I'm gonna turn that undead for you because
Right. And a lot of
I hate
the sovereigns work that way, but on an even more pragmatic scale, where,
that.
it's like, okay, I really don't care if you're faithful to me or not, but I'm definitely going to hand out power whenever you're working my will. Like it's more almost like an exchange, a trade, a bargain. So the scribes do not give a rat's ass about worship at all. They do not care. And they rarely communicate with mortals. It's just not important to them to communicate with mortals. If
Unless
unless what?
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, if it's literally something's gonna break the foundation of
Mm-hmm.
time and law, and then they might say, "Hey, Steve the scribe. Hey, funny name. I like it. Yeah, shit's going down. We need you to rally because, like, oh no, never mind. It's happening. Forget it. It was too late.
I feel like the scribes would prefer to work through other methods than
Yeah,
communicating with mortals. They're not above it, and when they do communicate with mortals, oftentimes like, oh my god, I just met a scribe, and the scribe is just like, you know, Sector 347 is in alignment with Dynamic 345. All is according to plan. Like not like, sounding like movie robots, but just saying things that do not make sense to a mortal because they only make sense if you have context of the interaction of the dimensions on a level mortals don't even interact.
they speak code. They don't even
Yeah,
speak
they
like a regular.
practically speak code.
They
That's
speak code, and they're literally just inserting their idea into your brain. It's not even talking to
mm-hmm.
you.
Most interactions with the scribes, they're not even talking to you. It's just you're being exposed to their stream of thought. It's
Yes,
like you're in the
exactly.
room where somebody's working and there's people who work out loud. They talk to themselves as they work, and they're not just like having an unrelated conversation. They're talking through their work. It's like the rubber duck hypothesis, where you try to explain something to a rubber duck
Yep.
on your desk, and that helps you understand it. So if you talk to a scribe, they're going to be just talking or transmitting information that is irrelevant to you that you happen to be exposed to. And if you are wise and you have a lot of alchemical lore and you've studied the code, you might be able to take what they're talking about and be like, oh, I can use that in this spell. I can use that in this alchemical process. So being a cleric of the scribes is not about worshiping them. It's about trying to understand them to better understand the universe. And if there's a
And
religious aspect to it, it's more about, again, the value of knowledge and using this understanding to achieve enlightenment. Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say we kind of stumbled into just in general, God Eats Prayer Badly with an Anakra. There are individuals and cultures and societies that are very fervent in their worship to either a particular entity or a faith that they have. But for the large majority of people within Anakra, when you are selecting like a deity to follow, it's less about like, oh man, I love everything that this entity is about, and I'm going to completely follow them and do everything they say and be big on their worship. Because again, most of the entities in Anakra aren't asking for that. I feel like, for instance, if you decide that you want to be a follower of Silit, the Titan of rain and whatnot. You're not like doing it because, oh yeah, I stand by all of their stuff and I'm really big into what they stand for, and I'm gonna like make sure that I kill every other deity in time so I can make sure that they're the best. It's more like, hey, I like their what is that thing you always say, mate? About subscribing.
Your ideas intrigue me, and I wish to subscribe to your newsletter.
I think that's how a lot of it is done. It's more like, hey, I like your aesthetic, I like what you're about, and the way that you kind of what your domain or what your deal is makes me feel good about myself, and I like
Mhm.
the idea of following that. And it's a lot more. Someone in chat earlier said it's very laissez-faire in regards to the approach to you're not like signing up and it's like, oh, you better not use any spells that are outside of my domain or I'm going to be pissed. It's like, no, I don't care if you're a cleric of Selit. Feel free to ask Sin for fire or
Yeah,
something like
because
that.
still
It
it's not
does.
going to give you fire. Like that's just
Yeah,
not going to happen.
but it's more like if you're but if you're walking around in Akra and you're like, I'm a priest of Ziliar, that means something different than I'm a priest of Ramius. That there are
Mhm.
certain entities that where that's very important for, and it's like, oh wow. Somebody, for the most part, I think like 90% of people saying, I'm a cleric of this. It's like, oh, cool. You like wearing those colored robes. That's great. The other 10% is like, hey, I'm a cleric of this. And it's like, oh, you're serious about this. Okay, cool. Great. Good to know. I know where to put you in my arrangement of what's important to you and what's not immediately.
We could practically, and we probably should do a whole episode about the difference
Yeah.
between gods and religion, because most people in Anakra are polytheistic. One, because it's blatantly obvious to anyone who lives here that there are, in fact, more than one deity. So
Yeah.
so like when you say monotheism in Anakra, you don't mean I think there's only one god, unless there's a religion that believes that all the other gods are a lie, which we haven't really created one. It's more like most people are, okay, well, if I need inspiration or I'm making a fire, I'll pray to Sin. And if I'm, asking for fertile crops and I live by the riverbed, I'll pray to Silet or, the ghost of Arakura or whatever. It's just different gods are in charge of
The
different
ghost of
things.
Eric.
And so if you
Yeah.
want something from this god, you ask this god. It's religions that tend to be more specific. And a lot of the powers and deities of Anakra, especially the elemental ones, like your star gods, your infernals, etc., they have philosophy, they have ideologies, they have ways they believe things should be. A lot of the elemental gods don't. Some of them do, but a lot of them don't have that. They don't really care about how you live your life. They don't have a lot of virtues. They don't have an ideology. They might have certain ideas associated with them, like Silit is all about, who again is the god of clay, mud, fertile soil, and riverbeds. Like, oh yeah, pottery, change, fertility, these are good things and I will give them to you, and you should celebrate them. But Silit isn't going to say, here's how you should live your, here's the, Silit's 10 commandments of how you should live your life. It's more just like, hey, these things
What do
are
you
good.
mean you moved 10 miles inland? There's no rivers there. What the hell's wrong with you?
Absolutely. But a religion that forms around Silit might assign certain teachings, life lessons, sins, and virtues to Silit that the Titan themselves doesn't really care about. Uh, but I think this is a subject for another episode, because there's one super important thing we haven't really covered. You just strayed back into the territory of Ramius. We haven't talked about Ramius screwing with the Emerald Tablets yet.
No, we haven't, and we're slowly running out of time. I did, however, want to make a quick little plug that we are very, very close to a possible kind of monotheistic society with Thulrain. They're not quite there, but they have this very fervent, we've built an entire ideology around this one figure that, really is probably more important than we're is less important than we're making them out to be. And we understand that these other things exist, but ours is the truest and the best. I think that's like kind of the closest we've gotten to that.
It is, and that doesn't really exist yet at the time of Quest for the Book of Dawn, but it's
No, no,
coming
it
down the
doesn't.
line. I think the closest thing I can imagine, aside from the various infernal cults, is Brontha, the Solar Empire, which is fervently dedicated to Zalar because Zalar helped them survive the demonic Imperium. They're one of the nations that was not overrun by demons and not conquered by warlocks, and part of that is because they became this hardcore theocracy dedicated to the sun god, and like they're all about their paladins and their smiting of evil and all that stuff. So they don't hate other gods and they're not monotheistic, but they're super hardcore. They're one of the more hardcore religions
Oh
out
yeah,
there. the,
absolutely.
the other titan, one of the other titans who inspires a lot of hardcore religions in various forms, but all of them definitely have an ideology, is Ramius.
Yeah.
That's because Ramius has a goddamn purpose on this world. So going back to the firmament where we started this episode, the Infernals
Yes.
realized that because the sovereigns wrote the source code for the new world, they wrote the Emerald Tablets. Firmament is a deliberate emergent property of the Four Kingdoms interlocking. That not only keeps things out, it keeps the Infernals trapped inside, and more importantly, it keeps Anacra in a form that the Infernals cannot bend to their will through the power of Dawn. So, okay, the Infernals hate the Firmament. They hate the Four Kingdoms. They want to go back to creative mode. They realize that the sovereigns are the cosmic keystone. The sovereigns themselves are integral to the structural integrity of the firmament. So, through a very complicated, very labor-intensive, very manipulative process, Uzul discorporates / kills Arakura. This successfully weakens the firmament, why the One Flesh is able to come in among other complications. And the Infernals use this opportunity to run rampant across the mortal world, leading to the demonic Imperium, which we always talk about because it's one of the most important periods of history in Anacra. During that time, Ramius, one of the Titans, Arakura's son, goes like all the sovereigns deal with this in different ways, but Ramius spends the entire time studying the Emerald Tablets and studying the
Oh yeah.
firmament, and comes up with a way to edit the Emerald Tablets. Now, we had a question last time, which is I think it was in our Discord, which is why doesn't Ramius just change the code to kill all the Infernals or turn them into rabbits or something? And the reason for that, in my head, is that Ramius did not attain total mastery of the Emerald Tablets. The Emerald Tablets it's like a program that people have been working on for so long that the code is so complicated that even the people who originally wrote it don't know it like the back of their hands. It's almost taken on a life of its own. It's a bigger system than just the sovereigns themselves. So Ramius has some of the best understanding, aside from the scribes who kind of are the Emerald Tablets. Ramius is one of the entities who understands the source code of the universe better than anyone else. And even Ramius's understanding is small, even though Ramius is ahead of everyone else. So Ramius goes through all this effort, finds first off how to accomplish an edit. We haven't really detailed how he actually did this, but in my head, and Matt, feel free to chime in on this. In my head, there were two main elements to this. The first was just an absolutely phenomenal level of understanding of the Emerald Tablets themselves. And if you don't understand them and how they work, then you're not going to succeed at this. Second, there was a ritual. There was a ritual with very specific standards and settings. It was like performing surgery, or it was like, editing code on a nuclear reactor while it is still running. So going in and editing the tablets live is incredibly dangerous because they are, even though they might appear as just, oh look, a glowing translucent slab of words, like it's the live wires of the multiverse. So if you start screwing with it, not only could you really mess up the multiverse, but it's like poking a reactor. You could blow yourself up. So the ritual that was used, the process that was used to edit them was incredibly carefully set up, incredibly precise, probably had to happen when the universe was in a certain cosmic alignment. It created this small window when the change could be enacted. The change had to be enacted with a lot of different magical safeguards in place from a very specific position in the world, probably with like, ritual totems scattered at key ley lines around the universe. Uh, and it required each of those was constructed to incredibly specific specifications, probably made out of emeralds, maybe with some blood in it. Very specific words had to be recited, very specific elements had to be present, and a huge infusion of energy was necessary in order to make the edit. Ramius sacrificed a part of his own divine nature, gave up some of his titanhood. He's more powerful now than he was before he edited the tablets, but that's because he sacrificed his own divine essence to write himself into the source code of the universe as the overlord of the dead. So he cannot leave the underworld. He is now like a part of the underworld. He essentially is fused to the golden throne of the underworld. So,
I was going to say he gave up not only his divinity but his freedom. He is more powerful,
mhm,
but anything that has a domain is more powerful in its lair or in its domain, and he basically gave himself a permanent domain that he can never leave.
right. And he gave up a lot of his free will and his personality and all this other stuff because now he's part of the system. He's part of the mechanism. So replicating Ramius's work would be incredibly difficult because one, Ramius destroyed all of it. Just yeah, he doesn't sit on the throne, he is the throne. Ramius's chamber at the heart of the Kingdom of Shadows, he reigns from this gigantic mausoleum, and he is not visible except as a shadow in the empty throne. There's this gigantic marble throne and a huge shadow of a figure sitting in it, but Ramius himself is invisible because he's just part of that now. His power extends, his grasp extends like vast and far, but he barely even exists except as this cosmic force now.
Also, an important thing to bring up, mate, that we haven't really covered, and we'll tease it for a future episode. But one of the reasons why, like you said, not only did all this ritual and prep have to get done, but a huge amount of power, not only that he gave up, but had to have in the first place. Because Ramius, aside from being one of the actual trueborn Titan children of the sovereigns, after Erakora's death, he was the first suzerain, who was kind of like the replacement sovereign. And we haven't really covered suzerains in any of these talks as of yet. But when things happen, like you mentioned, it's very important to the actual firmament itself, because when a titan, or rather when a sovereign is discorporated, it permanently weakens or ruptures part of that firmament that keeps the energy inside Vanakra from leaking out and attracting other beings in the hungry dark and allowing things to be able to enter in, which is why one of the defenses to help with that was the celestials and the light, and making sure that they could have guardians to protect it. But another part of that was the sovereigns enacting, basically electing a titan or other being that was related to them to take over as a, you could never replace a sovereign. These like we said, they're coded into the world, but you could take somebody to basically say, hey, in a way, I'm the vice president. I'll come in and I'll step in and act while this person is no longer able to directly affect it. And what he had to do, he ended up taking up the mantle of the suzerain of Earth. However, rather than running it and actively fighting against the demonic imperium, he then chose to take this power that he had, this mantle of energy, while also using it to kind of help patch up the firmament. He used that to instead enact a permanent and radical change against the demonic imperium, rather than trying to fight them or hide from them like the rest of the sovereigns and the titans were doing at the time.
There's an argument to be made that if he was not the suzerain, and again, the idea of a suzerain, we'll go into it. Matt's done a lot of work on this. A lot of it was his idea. The idea is that you may not become a sovereign, but you get the mantle of their authority and a lot of their power in order to be the acting sovereign. It is this idea of this mantle of power that is passed on, and in some ways, Ramius abused that. But
Abused it, and also, like we were saying, one of the reasons why you could take it, even if a sovereign had done this ritual, could they have even killed all the infernals and turned them all into rabbits or whatever? And I don't think so. I think it would take so much. I think the only reason Ramius was able to get to where he was not only was he a titan and had all this power and did all this prep and had this mantle of energy. Even if there was more power, could you put enough power into it to enact such a change? It's possible, but I think that, like we had discussed, with the amount of time that he had, the power that he had, and the prep that he had done, this was the best that Ramius could get in 500 years, or at least several hundred
yeah,
years of preparation.
I think it's theoretically possible. Nobody knows if it's impossible, right? That's how difficult it is. And again,
Yeah.
even with wearing the hat of one of the people who wrote the code. And like he had the admin credentials of one of the people who wrote the code, and he had all this power, and he spent extra time studying the code, and the furthest he got was to enact the radical changes that he made. And that took everything, and he burned all of his texts. Like, not that he had physical text, but he erased that knowledge as much as he could. He probably killed or discorporated anyone who helped him in the process to make sure no one could repeat or undo what he did. And that is the, if you look at the sacrifices and the energy required to enact that change, that gives you an idea of how difficult it is to edit the tablets and why it just hasn't been done again.
At least on that scale.
Yeah, at least on that scale. We've got about 5 minutes left. Matt, do you feel like there's anything that we haven't touched on that we ought to go on, or do you have any insightful comments or memes about what we've talked about so far?
I feel like we've actually done a really good job of we went a bit off target, but we
Mm-hmm.
covered what we wanted. We covered the emerald tablets, we covered the firmament. I don't think there's a whole lot more that we didn't already adjacently discuss about this that we could say. Uh, so do you have anything that you were thinking final thoughts on?
I would say one, chat, hit us with any final questions, and two, we're going to get back to the topic of magical energy at some point, but alchemical energy is essentially energy derived from the movement and interaction of the four kingdoms, not grinding against each other, but like almost a water wheel, right? It's energy derived as a byproduct of the firmament and its operation. So
Yeah.
alchemy, again, it's this transcendental practice studying the secrets, believing that you can change yourself to become more enlightened, more perfect, more one with the cosmos. And a lot of it is when you're not just making your strongest potions, which are too strong for you, traveler. It's transformative because you're understanding how the different pieces of the four kingdoms work together. Let's see.
One of the questions that we had just gotten was, would either the most powerful of the Silent City dragons, or at least one of them, be more powerful enough to be able to enact such a change that we had described that Ramius was attempting but couldn't actually get to?
The answer to that is maybe. Like, because here's the other thing about the dragons from the Silent City. Not only are they ridiculously strong, because in Anacra, you've got a few things going on. It's not just strength, right? Because you've got raw power and magical energy and stuff. But you've also got like different rules, your nature. And the dragons of the Silent City, Ashardalon being the dragon of the first gate, do not come from Anacra. They come from the world before. They are an outside context problem. So, if any entity is capable of screwing with the Emerald Tablets, one, there's two schools of thought, I would say. One is that only the Sovereigns and the Titans can do it because they're the only ones who have been seen to do it so far. But on the other hand, somebody who is not bound by those rules, who comes from a previous universe or outside our universe and like hasn't dwelled here long enough to really become bound by those rules, could also pose such a threat. I would say that smart scribes and scholars in Quest for the Book of Dawn, who are aware of the fact that a Chardalon has been released from the Silent City, are worrying about that right now and are thinking about those possible consequences.
And here's the thing, I feel like you hit the nail on the head there, mate. It's one of those things that until it happens, there's no way to really know. But like you said, put it this way: you figure that you have entities that have been codified to be able to actually make changes to these. And really, I don't even think that the tablets were made to make changes. These were set rules that were created
Mm-hmm.
at the founding of the worlds,
That's why
and
changing them
then
is
from
so hard.
that's why changing them is so hard. And then so you have a direct descendant of these initial creators who put just a
Everything,
massive
everything.
amount of time and everything into changing this. And then if you take again the Infernals, one of the big things they want to do is they want to get their hands on these tablets, figure out how to use them. Possibly the dragons of the Silent City, they may want to. I honestly don't think the dragons give one rat's behind about them. I it's very difficult to know what they even consider or want. I mean, if you take like we described that whole Eldritch God comparison with the ants, I feel like in a similar fashion, the dragons from the Silent City, the previous multiverse, they're in a similar boat. When they were unleashed, and we don't have to get super into that because there's a lot of crazy things that go into that. But when they were unleashed and then retamed and brought back and shoved back into their gates, uh, they just went out and started destroying things. And I don't think they were even targeting the demons. I think it just there were so many that happened that way. But I feel like when they came out, they just started burning and tearing
They
and
were just stretching
destroying.
their wings, you know?
They were stretching their wings, unleashing their rage. Like they weren't even trying to help, which is why the sovereigns and the rest of the goodly beings that survived were so cowed by those beings. They had never seen or recognized. I mean, there were no dragons in Anakra before them, and only after seeing these great beasts devastate the land did the sovereigns craft dragons in their image, and that's the beast that we have, going forward nowadays. But I think that it would be very difficult for the dragons or even the infernals to access. What I'm getting at is if Ramia spent over like 500 years making this happen, just imagine how long it would take something that wasn't codified into it. Either it would take longer, or if it did take less time, even if they were more powerful in a sense, I think the chance for mishap is far greater. You know what I mean?
I agree, but if we think of the Emerald Tablets less as a programming file and more like a motherboard, right? Because if it's not designed to be changed, then it's firmware. It's not just programmed, it's like built. The program is a physical program. So to
Yeah.
change it, you need to get inside the chip with an electron microscope and make microscopic changes that could blow the whole thing up if you do it wrong, and etc. I would argue that the dragons of the world before could play the role of the original bug. So there's a story that the first computer bug was an actual bug that got in, like a cockroach or something, that got into the mainframe and was tripping a circuit. And because it was tripping a circuit, that messed up the ones and zeros, so the program operated wrongly. Did that bug know what the hell it was doing? No, because it was outside of that system and had no comprehension of it. I would argue scholars within the world, not speaking as a creator of Anakra, but like a scholar within the world, might be worried right now that an outside context problem like the dragons of the world before could have a similar effect on reality, where it's outside of it, it's not bound by it, it can have a deleterious effect on it, but
Intentional or not. Yeah.
its ability to make intentional changes would be very, very, that'd be super, super difficult, but they'd be worried that its mere presence could destabilize this.
So in a way, we're kind of comparing the dragons to cockroaches and infernals to an actual virus, is what we're kind of
Yes,
looking at here, in a
precisely,
sense.
precisely. Whereas, like, yeah, your virus
Malware.
can cause a lot of problems, but it can't mess with the firmware because that is not a program, that is a hard coded chip.
Especially if you have like great firewalls and stuff like Anakra does. It has a
Exactly,
lot of things in
exactly.
place to do that. Whereas there's not a lot you can do. Cockroach gets in computer and starts screwing with stuff. It's like, ah, crap.
Well, that's what the
Not a
Celestials
lot
are for.
That's what the Celestials are for. Exactly.
All right, that's going to do it for time. Remember that if you have more questions, you can join our Discord with !Discord in our Twitch chat. We have a whole channel set up for lore. You can ask your lore questions. Sometimes Matt and I will answer them directly. Sometimes we'll add them to an upcoming episode of Lunch and Lore. There's a distinct possibility that Lunch and Lore is moving to a new time slot. So for news on that, again, join our Discord. Follow us on Twitter for up-to-date scheduling news, because we are hoping to make an announcement today about some show that's coming. Further details to
Ooh.
be distinguished. Fingers crossed. Until our next show, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to my co-host and co-founder of Anakra, NinjaMan Matt. Glad to have you. Thank you to everyone who is in chat, and have a fantastic day.
Bye, everybody.